Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here to present at this conference. I'm going to broaden in the discussion of peer factors that might be relevant to bullying or understanding bullying. I'm going to broaden the scope a bit to talk about aggression and violence in general, consistent with Dr. Wright's presentation, to provide a overall context. I want to talk about three topics. One is to provide an overview of the peer group contributions to aggression and violence, what we know about the kinds of dynamics that lead to increases in violence over time. Second, to describe social and peer dynamics can amplify aggression in peer interaction. And then third, to detail implications for peer group interventions that might reduce bullying and aggression. So I'm going to focus primarily on developmental issues, and then my colleague Ken Dodge will talk more specifically about interventions. So big picture developmentally, what do we know about the youth that end up being more aggressive in the long run? There's a long series of longitudinal studies that have identified a developmental progression that starts as early childhood and potentially goes to adolescence. A lot of us are referring to this as a cascade model, with a series of developmental sequences, beginning with garden variety normal self-regulation issues, and which is relatively normal, that can escalate to academic deficits and peer rejection, which later can lead to both reactive and proactive antisocial behavior. Now, the reason for distinguishing between reactive and proactive aggression is bullying is more proactive. It's not an emotional reaction necessarily. It's a planful attack on other kids. And Ken Dodge and John Cooey and others were instrumental in establishing that important distinction, which goes on to, in elementary school, that can lead, of course, to more school failure and potentially clustering into groups. And then you tend to get more serious forms of problem behavior. And one of these is more severe violence, and I'm going to talk more about that. The issue is that adults all along the developmental spectrum are potentially influential in curtailing that developmental sequence. So adult leadership, we emphasize parents, but also, of course, teachers can turn that around. So, and now, what are the dynamics that we know of that can lead to how peers potentially amplify some of these tendencies? How does a child that has just normal levels of defiance end up being more aggressive over time? And there's two dynamics that we've studied a lot, and one is coercion, and the other is what we call contagion, which is a tendency for, well, I'll talk about it in more detail, kids to reinforce each other for engaging in problem behaviors. And then along those are the kind of the microsocial underpinnings of violence. The macrosocial is potentially disrupted families, school, and then involvement in the neighborhoods. And of course, neighborhoods are going to be a key part of the puzzle. So what are these words? Coercion refers to when escape conditioning or negative reinforcement. That is, if I escalate and the person backs down, I'm more likely to escalate and be aggressive in the future. Contagion refers to what I've called in the past deviancy training, which is mutual positive reinforcement for talk, behavior among peers. And then more recently, I've been looking at coercive joining, which is when a number of youth join on the basis of their shared value of aggression and talk and plan attacks or retaliations against other groups. These are all normal, believe it or not, these are normal kids' behavior. This is not necessarily pathologizing it, but these are just describing what some of the dynamics are. So this is quickly coercion: child's aggressive, peer's aggressive, child escalates, peer backs down. So that sequence, if that happens a lot, kids learn to be more and more aggressive over time. The other deviancy training is popularized by Beavis and Butthead, and if you've ever seen this Beavis and Butthead, that tells you everything about deviancy training. This is the kind of interaction that happens outside of adult supervision. Child talks about something deviant, the peer laughs, the child escalates the story, and the peer joins in. So two kids are sitting there talking about defying a teacher, and then pretty soon one of the kids shares a story where he locks up the vice principal in the office, and they laugh about that. And then what we found is in 30 minutes of videotaped observation and just measuring that kids who do that are much more likely to do other deviant things down the road. The tendency to talk that way with your friends is highly stable. This is a 5-year time span, 30 minutes of observation on a videotape where kids shouldn't be acting out because they know they're being videotaped in a research context. Highly stable tendency to engage in this kind of dynamic. So it's a tool that kids use to connect with other kids. And this stability coefficient is really, most of those were new friends. This is a videotapes observations of friends. These were new friends. So a very, very highly stable trait. So developmentally, it looks like what's happening is that as early as kindergarten, kids will aggregate on the playground and they will start to reward each other for these types of aggressive positions, and that clustering will lead to more and more aggressive acts on the playground or in neighborhood settings. And the work by Jim Snyder has been very important for demonstrating that you can easily observe these types of interactions on some playgrounds, and you can actually watch over the course of 2 years kids become progressively more aggressive. Now, what we're more concerned about is the kids aggregating into better defined groups over time, and we know that since the beginning of the 19th century, gangs in the U.S. have been involved in Boston, New York, through the last century, and have become and remain prevalent in many of our more impoverished neighborhoods and cities. So what predicts gang involvement? A history of antisocial behavior, a history of rejection by peers and teachers, and poor grades. This is for females. And for males, this is an interesting piece. Again, antisocial behavior, peer rejection, and academic grades. But now we see that popularity is actually related to more gang involvement down the road. So some neighborhoods, the more popular kids are more likely to engage in gang behavior. And these findings fit well with what Phil Rodkin and others, Toon Selesson, have taught us about social status, that some of the kids that we think are potentially problematic are actually higher social status in the peer group, and that might be part of the dynamic that maintains bullying and aggressive behavior. So we know longitudinally, now how do kids move from that point of being aggressive on the playground to being assaulting and being more dangerous in the community? We know that gang involvement is important. But by and large, again, it's the style in which they connect with other peers, and we've been looking at this coercive joining at age 16, and again, we just look at videotapes of kids interacting. We bring them into the lab and watch them interact, and there's a tendency to talk about victimizing other people, other genders, it doesn't matter, the outgroup, whatever the outgroup happens to be. And that tendency to connect that way, and they even are aggressive with each other, and there's a struggle for dominance in the room while they're being videotaped. That dynamic is predicting young adult dangerousness. That means reporting assaults, reporting robberies, being arrested for assaults and robberies, violence, over and above their tendency to be antisocial behavior at age 16. So that's pretty important because it does seem to suggest that some of these dynamics around age 16 are still malleable, and if we address how kids dress and talk and connect with each other, that might be important for helping prevent or alter their tendency to get more problematic. This is part of the issue that I think we need to understand. We're talking about movement from aggression to more serious aggression. In some neighborhoods, you get more status by becoming more dangerous. And what does that mean? Well, it means that, let's say you're acted upon aggressively, you return that act, and you, the victim, who may have been the aggressor at time one, now the victim, submits. And you become known as more dangerous, and you gain status. That's a highly reinforcing sequence, and it functions well in some context. And the work by Dijkstra and Lindbergh revealed that in some settings, neighborhoods in New York, that carrying a weapon actually gained you that kind of status, and you can watch kids' status grow over time in that group as they began to pick up and carry weapons. So that just suggests that the dynamics of pure status in the social networks are pretty important to understand when we're thinking about how to prevent or treat. There are a number of factors that moderate peer influence. We know peers are important, but obviously not all kids respond to these types of pressures. One of the positive protective factors is self-regulation and self-control. A factor that tends to relate to being more vulnerable to peer influences is a history of marginalization or rejection by peers and by teachers. So kids who are not treated well or feel like they're disliked or don't connect are more likely to be vulnerable to peer influence. Interesting work by Mitch Prinstein on false consensus, the concept that other kids share those norms, that the violent norms are what everyone holds and believes, can make you more vulnerable to peer influence. And then, of course, adult structure and supervision. I like to think of it as adult leadership, having adults be in a leadership role, taking a stand and dealing with these minor events when they're occurring and not letting them escalate is certainly a key to moderating peer influence. And some really classic work on that by Shep Kellum and Bobby Laird. So in terms of summary and future directions, how am I doing? I guess I'm doing okay. Summary and future directions. From the developmental literature, it's pretty clear that if we put our investment into supporting adult involvement, building positive relationships with adults and kids, developing skillful strategies for group management, likely to have positive effects on problem behavior. Kids respond well to that, and you can reduce both coercion and contagion dynamics with that kind of strategy. Some great examples are positive PBIS. I see Catherine's here, and other, the good behavior game. There's a variety of very clear, the Olweus program. Instilling non-aggressive norms in the context of schools are likely to have positive effects. So norms are important, and letting norms slide is probably not a good idea, and having some leadership about the kinds of norms that are guiding interactions in a school or neighborhood are important. And then I think that the big gap is attending more to preventing the self-organization of youth into gangs. The development of this identity around a gang is very difficult to reduce or treat once it's happened. And a colleague of ours, Malcolm Klein, who helped Ken and I kind of pull together the literature about almost 10 years ago now, seemed nearly pretty discouraged about the potential for stopping a gang once it's formed. He spent his entire career on that, and he wrote a chapter in our book 2006. If you want to read anything about treating or stopping gang involvement, read that. It's pretty interesting. But prevention is certainly possible, and there is some evidence to suggest that even family-based interventions can reduce the the involvement of gangs in early adolescence. So with that, thank you for your attention.